the 19th day of April 2023. I'm your host tonight, Dana Durnford, also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call me the Gamma Goat. 709-589-4406. We are live. Everybody had a great day. Wherever you may be. Wherever you may see. I hope you all had a great day. We got a great show for everybody tonight on the second anniversary of me getting out of hospital 60 days ago. 2 months ago. And I'm doing wonderful, I think, compared to 2 months ago. I'm doing amazing. Yep, feels good. The most important thing on the planet is to kick the shit out of the kooky nuclear industry. There's no shorts of kook in the nuke. Speaking of kooks, there's one right there. Oppenheimer was a victim, as far as I can tell. And I've listened to a lot of his lectures and the interrogations of him. There's many hours of that online. What you look into your very left is quite the abnormality. It was an experiment Atomic Energy Agency in the United States carried out on a section of forest that we'll get into coming up. Speaking of getting into, CNN was never inside of Fukushima. Here's a clip from 2013 of Anna Cohen, is it? I think. Claiming she's in the building to your left, 100 feet above the carnage.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
So there's zero possibility she's in a building that don't exist. At least we're here in Canada, you can't do stuff like that. Maybe you can do it in America. But I don't think so. I've never seen it anywhere else. Until we get to Fukushima, then all kinds of journalists can magically go in a building that don't exist. So, first off, CNN has... I probably got more viewers than CNN. And I got... Let me see. We got a poll tonight, by the way. I must have at least 10. I got 12. That's amazing. That's like one for each year. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them and not to build them? And the SUTEP, if you're in Luxembourg, you can sue the nuclear power plants if you get sick in the next 30 years. After they close, I should say. That'll go away. I got me some Robitussin. Disclaimer, Robitussin is not paying me to advertise. So why am I advertising? I'll try to avoid doing that. My apologies. Fukushima fishing industry survived a nuclear disaster. They absolutely, positively, unequivocally were banned in over 55 countries. So how's that surviving a nuclear disaster? It was really despicable. And of course, it's CNN. Dana, what do you expect? I know, I'm just saying. You got this elderly fisherman who doesn't have a clue what nuclear is, apparently. So they interviewed him. He brings his fish in not very far from Fukushima ongoing nuclear meltdowns and detonated fuel pools to get the fish tested for radiation before they goes to market in a few hours, right? And TEPCO is doing all the lovely testing. This is madness. How the hell did we ever get here? So they invoked the tsunami. They got the fishermen saying, I don't understand why nobody wants our fish. He's really upset with everybody for being scared of nuclear. Stewart, well, what can I say? That's CNN that nobody else has already said. Nothing, I guess. Unbelievable. Now he knows what he's doing is not true. He knows, like, his job is to cover up the nuclear meltdown, convince you to eat the radioactive food, and he has no illusions about what his job is. I just find it amazing that people like that actually exist. What is the only thing more amazing is that all media does the exact same thing for nuclear. They say this apparently is the water filtration. Now, we covered that last night for the first hour of the show. And if you really want to learn about tanks and water filtration, I got the best video imaginable for you. This is Japan testing the fish before they ship it over to market. This is the risk communicator at TEPCO, which is nationalized. In fact, I think CNN said owned, but let's not worry about it. That's the water from the tanks. These guys are crazy. They do an interview. This is CNN. Doing an interview with Ian Fairley from United Kingdom. And we've covered some of his studies and articles, but he refuses to understand that reactor 3 and 4 were destroyed and the fuel pools were lost. So how can we trust him? It's creepy. These reporters, I got to admit, after all these years, they creep me out. And because I cover it so much, I see so much of it, 7 days a week for so many years, it creeps me out, I think is the only way I can explain it. It's a really strange thing. If that hose was transporting water, if those tanks were actually full of 2.2 sieverts per liter water, wherever that hose was running across the 10 feet of cement and pavement and steel that they got there to shield them from the fuel assemblies that were buried by bulldozers originally after the detonations. If you walked over the hoses without any of that in the equation, that's a lethal dose. All the hoses for the water filtration facility are going to be a lethal dose. You can't turn the thing on. You can't filter this because 2.2 sieverts a liter, you're talking about thousands of sieverts an hour in the filter, which means the filter's got to be 6 to 8 feet thick. And if it's not, you got to be several hundred feet away and running away, or you're going to die that day. So anyway, CNN, so you're pretty desperate when you use CNN as a public relation firm. You basically gave up all hope. So when they throw money at CNN to come out and help the nuclear industry, that's confirmation the nuclear industry is dying. And if you got investments in uranium, you should dump them immediately. And so they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people got their name on the story. 5 people. That's really unusual, by the way. So the fisherman's 77 years old, and he seems pretty smart, pretty good to go, but he doesn't know the difference. about nuclear. He's a third generation fisherman. I was sixth or seventh generation. And we lost our fishery, they should lose theirs, right? It's a ritual he repeated for more than a decade. He'll test his catch for radiation. He's been doing it for a decade, which means he never stopped fishing in the nuclear wasteland. That's very disappointing. So they always got to say the earthquake and tsunami triggered the meltdown. Every story you'll see that exact framing. And it's when you see that, that means it was written by somebody else, right? Because everybody don't write the same sentence everywhere for years. Spewing deadly radioactive particles into the surrounding area. Spewing. That offends me, by the way. Spewing. I'll spew ya. Actually, I dug up another study. I'm lucky I won't find it. This was another study of airborne radiation. I use that for a change. Government radiation levels on the U.S. West Coast spiked to 1,000 times normal after Fukushima. And that was cesium-137 at over, 1 million becquerels a square meter. 1 to the power of 10 meter becquerels, a million becquerels square meter, cubic meter. Bear with me, let me get this on the big screen. Yeah, this is cubic meter that you're breathing of air. See, this is absurd numbers, by the way, just to give you some context maybe. That's the west coast of America and Canada right here. That line you're seeing right here. Right, that's New Mexico actually, right here or something. Or the cluster up there is Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia. That's the Pacific Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is right here. That model is from France, 18 to 3rd. So that model is 7 days after the tsunami. Let me show you a model from France based on 16 to 20 days, this model here. So when the plume gets to the edge here, that'll be 20 days basically. You're on the 25th, 26th, 27th of March. You're approaching 20 days there. And it's 20 days to now, it stops at 30 days. 32, so 32 days altogether. But if you move the model back, and you're on the west coast, so let's just cover the west coast. So now you've seen the Pacific, the west coast, and parts of Canada. And that's the 22nd. That's 10 days after the tsunami and 7 days after reactor 3 detonated. So if I move it ahead to 16 days from the 15th, the last reactor detonating, that's 10 days, I think. Let me wait. That's 10 days after the last reactor detonated, the official story. And that's 20 days after the tsunami. That's 15 days later. And so let's keep her going, I guess. Into the surrounding area. But as I just showed you, covered the entire planet, right? So they say into the surrounding area. They call it spewing. spewing deadly radioactivity, but we're talking about 1 million becquerels a cubic meter of cesium-137. 1 to the power 10 million becquerels a cubic meter, 10 million becquerels a cubic meter, basically. Or 1 to 10 million becquerels, maybe that's what they're saying. Yeah, it is. 1 million to 10 million. We'll get there. It could take forever, but we'll get there. Into the surrounding area. Well, it covered the entire planet in 15 days. You can't call that a leak when it covered the whole planet in 15 days, you sadistic crazies. The ban lasted over a year, and even after it was lifted, the ban was only for a year, and this covered the planet in 15 days. And there's many models from many countries, including TEPCO, that shows the same thing. The numbers are extraordinary. We've never heard tell of any numbers like this pre-Fukushima nuclear meltdown. Not even close to it. There's no accident in history with multiple reactors and 8 fuel pools that are gone. They're gone. The rest of them can pretend they're not gone, but we show you the documentation, the pictures, the actual documentation all the time. And you can pretend they're not gone, but you know they're gone, right? The ban lasted over a year even after it was lifted. Ocean currents have since dispersed the contaminated water enough the cesium is undetectable, Dana. So, if you didn't hate CNN, hang around for a few more minutes. We'll get you into the spirit. That's a 2013 model, by the way. The Japanese government International Atomic Energy Agency, the military-industrial complex pet rabbit, a United Nations body. It's a subsidy of a company from a corporation known as United Nations. They're no different structurally than McDonald's, which means you can't hold them accountable. Body promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. Like, how can you call that the Pacific Ocean after 6 years and 15 days of radioactive fallout peaceful? So they're pretty desperate when they're using CNN. CNN is going to bring the real lowlifes in to support their fake assertions, right? And CNN has got the lowest numbers of any TV station in history. Year after year on top of that, thank goodness. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which has got nothing to do with it, has no power over any country, let alone nuclear. It will also monitor, review the releases for as long as necessary for a couple of million years. At the request of the Japanese government, and as we covered there a couple of months or a month ago, they have no authority over Japanese government or any other government. They're a corporation. They're basically a think tank that has been weaponized against humanity and the species. Well, radioactive wastewater, calling it wastewater, of course, is madness. This is lethal by the liter. So if you took 2 liters of it, say if you took, it's 2.2 sieverts a liter just bedded at the emitter, because this is stuff you're pouring over the reactor courses. We're loaded with gammas, alphas, neutrons, and the beta that they're emitting to is beta only. So if you took, say, 5 gallons, 25 liters of this stuff, and you put a 25-gallon jerry can at every subway station on the planet and every popular venue on the planet, and every person walks past it will die within a few hours. You don't have to drink it, you don't have to go over and pet it. You walk past it and you die. A lousy 5 gallons. And you can't dilute it, you can just spread it out. You can't destroy it. And gas, oil, and coal emissions, don't do that. and they don't do this. Only nuclear has emissions. These emissions, by the way, are pulsing energy at the speed of light. And so this triggers diseases. We're seeing die-offs worldwide since Fukushima. We get the Fukushima wasting disease from it that you see in whales and seals and porpoises and dolphins and migratory birds in particular. It wiped out the majority of the insects in the first 10 years, and in increments over the next decade. I doubt highly any species will survive. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them? And the reason I'm framing it that way is because there's 1,800 diseases that are associated with anthropogenic man-made radiation. And, heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. Does any of that sound familiar? If you've done studies around nuclear power plants pre-Fukushima, you would see a massive discrepancy from places where there's no nuclear plants. But now we got Fukushima into the equation. This was a massive pulse. And we are on a downward spiral. One of the things we can do, and we have to do things, we got no choice. At some point we're going to do these things. Nuclear got to go, a minimum. For decades, nuclear power plants worldwide, including in the United States, Canada, Britain, France, China, South Korea, have been releasing waste, contaminated with tritium. Well, it's not contaminated with just tritium. Tritium is radioactive water. It's radioactive because you had the other elements in it. So the water itself is radioactive. And each under its own national quota. Just because they got a quota don't mean that it's harmless. Because it never goes away. It's forever. It pulses energy forever too. Said Tim Mercer, who I've called out many years ago. He does a lot of bird studies, right? But they were trying to replace other scumbags with him. They had reached out to me and asked me what I thought about the idea. They were excited by it. And that night I tore him apart. So they knew what was coming if he shows up. If people started picking on TEPCO in Fukushima, then the practice of releasing tritium to the environment, all these other nuclear power plants would need to be examined as well. So it's opened a can of worms. It'll open a can of worms. Now, I've done an entire presentation, 2.5 hours, of Canada's tritium releases. And the numbers, bear with me, I can probably bring it up. But I'm foolish. I'm definitely a sucker for paint. Oh, I'm getting smarter, I think, as I get older. I think there's no guarantee. Tritium hazard report pollution. Oh, by the way, look who that's by. Ian Fairley. This is public records, by the way. Point Leper, New Brunswick, is the worst on the planet for tritium here and it's in Canada on the Atlantic Ocean. 16,400,000 terabecquerels, trillion becquerels, is acceptable. This is what they're releasing by vapor and liquid each year. California is 15. 5, 10, 15. Europe is 18. Canada is 16,400,000 trillion becquerels is legal. Because the Canadian reactors, the CANDU reactors, are massive disease factories. And that's just one reactor in Canada site. The Gentilly is equally hideous. The Darlington, the Bruce, the Pickering. Sizewell in the UK it can release 8 trillion. So back to that story. He said, adding, the biological consequences of exposure to tritium have not been studied significantly. But there's his name on a study. It's been studied significantly. He actually covers it. So he thought everybody forgot about the 2007 story that he wrote. Right? That's him there, Ian Fairley. We're still on that story, right? So for him to claim that it hasn't been studied sufficiently is not true. CNN is either misquoting him, which is not likely because he would write an article, or he's playing ball. In 2012, a French literature review studies that tritium can be toxic to the DNA and reproductive processes of an aquatic animals, particularly invertebrates, France said. Imagine that, France. Australia has no nuclear power plants. It actually does, right? It's a small megawatt reactor, but it's prolific producing machine for isotopes. Allows more than 76,000 becquerels per liter. Per liter. And of course, Canada has been at up to 44,000 becquerels per liter. And after accidents, temporarily up to 1 million. And then you wonder why there's so much heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and diabetes and Down syndrome. Which coincidentally is why we got a poll. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them and not to build them? And if they're allowed, they can sue them if anybody got sick in their family. Because that's what Luxembourg and Germany law is. You got 30 years after the nuclear power plant closes to still sue the company. Such a great law. I love it. The US and European Union have much more conservative limits of 740, they claim, and 100 becquerels respectively. Well, California is only 15 becquerels per liter. But this is CNN. Don't expect anybody to be honest anywhere in media, of course. And Ian Fairley, an independent consultant in radioactivity environment, told CNN 2 wrongs don't make a right. And so what they're doing is promoting the tritium fable. Now, he fairly knows that the water can't be filtered and that it's saturated with so much isotopes and that it's hemorrhaging in the ocean for so many different areas for so long. Using the word tritium, the whole ocean is tritium now because of the releases and the airborne fallouts. So perpetrating the tritium deception, Fairley scores an F on his report card for that one. For instance, in 2012, the government, the stoic Japanese government, and TEPCO presented a proposed action plan to local fishing representatives involved pumping up groundwater before it flooded into the nuclear reactor buildings and releasing it into the sea. Fishing bodies were on board, but the plan was postponed until 2014 because 300 tons of radioactive water leaked from the plant into the sea. Now, so this is meant to make you believe that that's what happened, was there was a total of 300 tons had leaked into the sea. And so therefore they couldn't stop water coming down the mountain and ingressing into the plant. But the reality of it was they built a wall to do that, but it didn't work. Right? It was to stop the water coming down the mountain from coming through the site. That's what they're actually talking about. And we covered that last night in the first hour, all kinds of stuff about that. And claiming 300 tons of radioactive water leaked from the plant. See, the way they framed the story was to make you believe that that's all that came out of the plant. Hard cases? My goodness. Why do they gotta make such a complicated subject anyway? Bloody nuclear. So that's CNN Anna Curran right there pretending she's in the fuel pool at the top of the building. Don't forget that. So if you think they won't lie to you, guess what? That's all they've done. We are hoping that the International Atomic Energy Agency and other organizations can show them that there is no problem, that people will understand us, the fisherman said. And CNN was like with the microphone, yeah, and what else? You should be a journalist, is what CNN probably said to him. Tokyo's created a fund of $225 million to buy and store the radioactive seafood if consumers' confidence take a hit, and they'll sell it when people are not paying attention later on. So it's like the police finding 6 million tablets of fentanyl, saying they're going to burn it and destroy it. Instead, they burn salt tablets or something like that. And then they give the drugs to drug dealers who sells it to your children and kills all of them, right? That's the same thing, except much, much worse. We're saying they're going to buy the fish and store it till you stop paying attention, then they're going to sell it. That's the ultimate, I'll stab you if I see you on sight. That's what they're saying to you. In an effort to convince both fishermen and consumers the water to be released is safe, they hired CNN. In March 2022, TEPCO started conducting tests on tritium concentrations in fish and shellfish and seaweed reared in regular seawater as compared to those raised in the Alps treated water on site, which we've covered many times. Again, this, you can't, like, this water is from, you pour it over the reactor core, you can't stand up there, that's a lethal dose. You can't even run past it, that's a lethal dose. And so that's unbelievably despicable, and I have the utmost contempt for them for doing something like that. And look at all the people, CNNs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 people, one of them from Berkeley University, Hong Kong, Tokyo, London, Atlanta, Alberto Mier. You got all these, in order to give a legitimacy to, right, to slam a book and say, well, what's next? But yet, here they are pretending they're in a building that don't exist. So don't forget that, because then you lose sight of the real pictures, right? Oppenheimer, everything we know about the atomic bomb creator's epic new biop. So they're trying to, what they're trying to do, I got to remind you, just in case, is they're trying to sell, a movie. And before I got to be careful sometimes because you get sucked into the narratives, right? Looks like I'm gonna have to go for the stupid cough syrup that suit up my throat. It bothered me last night too when the show was over. Here we go. No turning back now. Here we go. Which one have I got there? I wonder. Okay, so I'm going to play Oppenheimer's famous quote. I'm not sure which one I'm playing here, but it's one of them.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
So pretty watching all the people melting, eh? Here's the official picture from Universal Studio. I'll get rid of that, hopefully. Follow the father of the atomic bomb, John Robert Oppenheimer. Well, it's not John, actually. Is it Julius? Or I can't remember. Which is... I have no excuses for not knowing, but I can't remember. I do know, but I just... he was tortured. They got rid of him. So there was Lawrence. I can't even remember now the whole string of them. Maybe that's a good thing. Lawrence, and I can't remember the rest of them. Thank goodness. Must be a miracle. That's twice. Now they built this is supposed to be Hiroshima, I think, or Nagasaki. They built the cities back on the bomb craters so they can study the survivors for generations in a nuclear wasteland. There's still a nuclear wasteland. And I've done quite a lot of anniversary presentations on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How the New Zealand cabinet learned to stop worrying about the bomb and love NATO. That's a spin on that movie. So first off, NATO was created in the bowels of the Soviet Union as a deterrent, right? Allegedly as a deterrent. And so when the Soviet Union was destroyed, they should have, and dissolved, and everybody's pensions, I might add, NATO should have been dissolved. So NATO now is carrying out a proxy war. You have 28 countries feeding weapons to Ukraine. Because NATO's afraid to do it on their own, right? That's how cowards roll. How the New Zealand cabinet, which is now New Zealand is supposed to be anti-nuclear. And what they mean by that was that not even nuclear-powered ships or submarines could tie up in their country. And they're anti-bomb and stuff like that. And they still are, but there is a lot of pro-nuclear in that country. Australia was taken over by the American military-industrial complex about 10 years ago. And now they have 7 of the top 10 weapons producers in Australia have shop set up there. But Australia is not a big war machine like America, which is what they're going to turn it into. And Australia has a lot of natural resources, right? And it's a captured colony nation on top of that from the British. The British influence there is still dominant, right? I know they had $12 billion for housings for the natives. $12 billion. And at the end of 5 years, they still haven't built a single house for the natives with the $10 billion. But they had 400 people hired. So they were just using the interest to employ a bunch of people with no intentions of building the houses for the natives. I mean, Britain went there and detonated all these nuclear weapons in Montebello, Maralinga, and a number of other places. They also detonated, and they used to wait for the wind to blow across Australia. They detonated over 700 dirty bombs in Australia, because we hear a lot about dirty bombs. And people say, oh, they've never used dirty bombs. Nobody's ever used it. But actually, Britain used over 700 of weaponized or ionized uranium, plutonium that was surrounded with conventional explosives and detonated in different parts of their desert in their country. These are dirty bombs. And so using nuclear testing was a nuclear war. It's the same bomb, the same radioactive fallout. So it's a nuclear war. And the radiation is forever. And so we've, like if you take the Soviet Union's biggest nuclear bomb, the world's biggest nuclear war, was equal to 3,800 of, that's their emittance anyway, 3,800 Nagasaki bombs, because Hiroshima was a uranium, the only uranium bomb we actually ever set off, and Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. And so that's, a single bomb was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. That's a nuclear war. If you fire one nuclear weapon at each other, that's a nuclear war. If you fire 3,800 nuclear weapons, like they blew up Hiroshima and Nagasaki with, that's a nuclear war, and a large one. It's equivalent to blowing up 3,600 cities. It blew out people's windows 700 kilometers away. Its plume went 20 miles above the jet stream. So everything that falls down hits the jet stream and gets carried around the world. Let's move on here. Livermore scientist, one of the Times Magazine's most influential people in the world. Oh, bless her heart. What a wonderful mass murderer she must be. She looks innocent too, don't she? Yeah, I wouldn't hurt a fly. I'm the female version of Oppenheimer in some ways. Now they're talking about the unicorn of nuclear, the fusion. And so Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories is a weapons facility. This is not a civilian facility. And so they talked about having ignition. And now she's on Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. Andrea, Annie, the French call her Anne, of course. Kritcher. Now, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories is one of the biggest aquifers in that part of the country, right? They spent $90 million on it in after the 50s because you contaminated that aquifer that feeds thousands of farms downstream, by the way, in major cities. So there would be an absurd amount of diseases from that down in those cities, and everybody is eating from those farms, which is another reason we got a poll tonight on my dad. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them? And you should move at least 150 miles away, but the anti-neutrino experiment here in Canada a few weeks ago was 150 miles away from a CANDU reactor, and the antineutrinos were registered in super clean water, 1.25 mile underground in rock, 150 miles away. So the neutrino wasn't going because of the coal plants or gas plants or oil plants, it was going because of the nuclear power plant. Which means you live within 150 miles of a nuclear power plant, even with a mountain in front of it, 100 miles away, those neutrinos, anthropogenic man-made neutrinos, are going to interact with your DNA and your chromosomes. Not only that, who knows what else we're talking about, right? The airborne, of course, these facilities are hemorrhaging radiation. That's why they're surrounded by farms. Or to be born on a nuclear-free planet. It's the burgers and the color balloons. So why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Anybody? Almost every single nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. Probably just a coincidence, right? All the fuel pools and all the nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. Let's keep going here. Where did I miss something? The Time magazine got Michael Schellenberg as a global hero. Michael Schellenberg. If you're a scumbag, Time magazine will put you on a pedestal so you don't commit suicide, I guess. Particle swapping reaction revealed masses of 19 exotic isotopes. These are natural ones, not the man-made ones, right? And uncovers a new one. This was the uranium-241 that we covered last week. So, many theories predict more than 7,000 possible isotopes in the solar system, but they're not, right? The stuff we create in the reactors, these are different than what the solar system produces. And over the years, I've heard, like the military has produced 12,000 plus isotopes that are national security issues or something, where they won't release that information, right? Doing directed energy weapons or something. Well, not something, but in that context. And so what they're talking about is nature. Like your periodic tables is the stardust. Man-made is not part of your periodic table. They might claim it is, but it's not. It's man-made. So, like, if you take sodium, salt, and make it radioactive, say some of it's got like a 2 or 3 year half-life, which means there's 10 half-lives. But at that point, it's going to decay to, well, not with sodium, it doesn't have 10 half-lives, I should say. It's only got a couple of half-lives, or even one, so most of it. Then it turns to lead. Or regular sodium, and then if you decay, it's not regular sodium anymore. What's the best way to put this? If there was there could be 50 decay chains, really, right? But it's still going to be radioactive lead at the end of it. It's not going to be normal lead. It came from a man-made source. So it's considered safe after 10 decays. And so that's why you hear about the 10 half-lives. After that, it's whatever was decayed is considered safe. But this is an industry that its entire legacy is predicated upon deceit and dishonesty and deception. And so you'll be very, very careful to trust anything they tell you. You got to go look at all the other sources, go out, find all the rumors, and then get the consensus that follows science. It was torturous trying to find someone originally to articulate Fukushima. It was torturous. And we've covered, I originally went after Yale University, Harvard University, Stanford University, Oxford University, MIT University, all the big shakers and movers. And we took their lectures and presentations after Fukushima started, and we dissected it, the entire lectures. And it's time for me to do it again, right? Because he took down my other site when we were looking for spiders that have been exterminated on the coast here. Same thing for the west coast. And you're dealing with an unbelievable legacy of corruption. So uranium-235, commonly used in nuclear reaction, has a half-life of 700 million years. 241, which is a new one that they discovered, has a half-life of 40 minutes times 10, which is 400 minutes. There's 1,440 minutes in a day, so 1/3 of the day. About 8-hour half-life. Discovery of the new nuclide is the key to deepening our knowledge of science and understanding how the universe. And now these short half-lives are very powerful energies too. Now it could decay to something that lives for 24,000 years, right? I haven't looked it up. I could look it up. Give me a second, I'll bring it up maybe. If I can find it. I think I'm there. I'll bring it up on a big screen. And I gotta figure out where's to. Uranium. Uranium's kind of like the odd man out. Nobody talks about it. Uranium-241. Now they're saying it's got a 5-minute half-life and no decay chain. So there's no decay chain for uranium-241. 235 decays to 700 million years later. To thorium. Well, americium-241, let me bring that up for 1 second, got a half-life of 432 years, but it's going to decay to plutonium-241. Neptunium-237. What's going on here today with me? It must be americium. Hang on, I gotta check now. Americium-241. That must be what I thought about. Decays to plutonium. No, it decays to neptunium. Bear with me. A 239. I just got to solve that riddle now. So that's neptunium. Let's go back to americium-239. That decays to plutonium. 239. Yes. And just one more. Bear with me. So 238, which got a half-life of 11 hours. Because we got plumes of that, models at 238. And that's 239. What about the 238? That decays to plutonium too, right? Right, that goes to 238 plutonium. That's got a half-life of 1 hour, and we got models on that. 238 got an 87-year half-life. It's got an 87-year half-life. And it decays to 234 uranium, which has 6,000-year half-life or something. 245,000-year half-life. But because it's man-made, it's different than, say, the natural decays of our natural periodic table elements, right? Because this is now man-made, that's totally different than, because they say like long half-lives means not very powerful, right? But that's not true for man-made isotopes. That's only true for natural isotopes. And even not that powerful man-made isotopes will still destroy the DNA and the chromosomes every second. Your body has to repair that every second. So your body has to send out white blood cells every second for the rest of your life to try to repair that damage that's constantly being produced, right? Which is why we got a poll, by the way. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them? Well, that makes sense. At some point, that's what they'll name them, right? But they'll call them biological weapons like they used to in the 50s and 60s. Okay, the Wisconsin forest, we roasted with radiation. And Joe Stellemacher, I probably butchered his name, sent that to me. And this was his study. And you can see the forest is where the dead section is too. You see the road going in there? That scares me too. And so what they had done, it's a bit complicated story. They slow cooked 1,440 acres of the gorgeous northern Wisconsin forest with 10,000 curries of radiation for about 6 months. So, and they used cesium. They use cesium-137. We'll get to it. I just want to explain to you how that. Curie is 37 billion disintegrations a second. So imagine 10,000 times 37 billion disintegrations a second, but in a concentrated form. So cesium-137 has 88 curies per gram. And a curie is 37 billion becquerels. But if you put this all together in one place, now it's pulsing energy. If you contain it, instead of releasing it, make it airborne where it's physical atoms floating around. If you take it and just contain it into a container, this is what they done. So it's 10,000 times 37 billion disintegrations per second in a device. It had a 2-ton lead shield that they would lower down for 4 hours a day so that people can go to the site. Knowing if our forest could withstand prolonged intense radiation was useful information. Humanity's saving information. We can't save humanity from nuclear, unfortunately. But what you can do is start trying to. And at some point you're going to have to try to. And that's what we're doing, is we're trying to distill the importance of making decisions for future generations, because we're making the decisions for all the future generations and the future species. And we have to set an example so future generations have a measuring stick, so to speak. The Atomic Energy Commission request was tempting for an institute. It included a comfortable stipend, which is money, the promise of continual employment, and the prestige of heading a landmark study. In the circles of U.S. forestry, the Reichslander outfit would become rock stars, or the academic equivalent of rock stars. And we've seen a lot of these types of connotations over the years where they entice people, because you can imagine how boring forestry job is, right? Would become rock stars, or the academic equivalent of rock stars. My goodness. Institute agreed. By 1967, the ball was rolling. And so they took this, you can see the Enterprise Radiation Force. The little square you're looking at is the section. And they gave you lots of details. The slow cooking would come from a barreled chunk of cesium-137, same source once used in many radiation therapy machines. The cesium salts have killed before. There are too many incidents to list here. Of course, nuclear industry will take you to court if you claim someone died from radiation. This Wisconsin forest would be exposed to a much larger hunk than that contained in any medical machine. This 14-ounce source was the equivalent of scooping out the glowing cesium salt of 10 external beam genocide machines. You call them radiation machines. Molding this mess into a pile, slapping a metal jacket on it, affectionately called a lead pig, which weighed 2 tons, and dangling the whole mess from a Rube Goldberg-looking contraption in the middle of the Midwest forest. This oddity would be controlled entirely by a remote clicker, which is created by Nikola Tesla, with a 400 to 500 foot length of cable as a fail-safe. They also built a shelter a mile away or something with thick, cement blocks to shield the scientists. We'll get to that. Wait till you see what that means. So this is them installing the device. And it's got a 2-ton lead shield that they can raise or lower. So when they raise it, everything is exposed. When they lower it, your shield. That's the version of it. That's their version of it. This is in the 60s. The more you learn about the radiation, the stranger it is. There are so many variables involved in measuring radiation: the activity, exposure, absorbed dose, equivalent dose, effective dose, lethal dose. Well, all of us meant to confuse you: the Greys, the Curies, the Roentgens, the Rems, the Rads, the Sieverts, the Becquerels. Well, Becquerels and Curies are the same. Greys, Roentgens, Rems, Rads, and Sieverts are energy. But Becquerels are physical atoms that are floating around that you can breathe in. So they counted all the trees first and labeled them by name. And sugar trees had the most success to survive. The Enterprise Radiation Force cesium source weighed about 14 ounces and producing 10,000 curies of radioactivity times 37 billion pulses a second. Receiving 10 rims a day for 10 days meant 100 rims. Because you're not breathing it there. This is contained, right? So you're getting energy. It's not like your blood alcohol level, which your body naturally processes and lowers. There's no body mechanism for processing radiation. Once it's there, it stays. Well, it starts your organ melting, and they continue to melt with these high doses. And then you die. And it's a terrible way to die. You can excrete some of your organs because of their melting in your body cavity, right? The scenario doesn't, which is what they seen after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I might add. And they took around 4,000 of Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims to America, where they incinerated the dead people, incinerated them, and sniffed the air for isotopes and the ashes. Then they dumped it in the local river. The scenario does not include REMs received as you approach or walk away from the cesium. It's like walking. If the fuel tanks were full, time you got within 1,000 feet, you drop dead. Because you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts is just beta. You gotta multiply it by 4 to get the gammas, alphas, the neutrons. And you're not including the X-rays. Once you're within a few hundred feet, the gamma ray beams into you and through your body, growing in intensity, accumulating with every step. Left that veritable loop. Well, it's melting your organs. It's wrecking every cell in your body immediately. It's whole body massive X-rays and gamma shine. Imagine you're capsizing through this lovely forest one fine afternoon, come across this odd contraption with a 6-foot platform standing 6 feet in the air. The platform sits under 3 poles tied together with a steel band like a teepee. So you're likely to walk up to it, right? You're like, what the hell is this? Must be some kind of water device to capture water and measure it or something like that. You would know you're getting a lethal dose now, right? That round container, affectionately known as the lead pig, is 2,000 pound, not 2 tons, 2,000 pound sleeve of lead containing the cesium source, but not in this scenario right there. They're putting it together, I'm assuming. Stay 2 hours, you get 400 REMs, and it'll destroy your bone marrow. If you're a child, that means you're mutating all your stem cells on top of that right away. And turns your intestines to a bloody goo. Stay for 3 hours. Well, the dose we're talking about is a lot worse than that, folks. Today we know the difference. 95% of you would never leave again after 3 hours. This is 1,000 REM. So this is meant to tell you the dose from the distance. But again, the doses, I don't think they're very close to being accurate. Firing an entire, it's much higher as far as I know. Finding an entirely new section of the prime force would be too costly and time consuming. So the researchers suggest that slicing off 1,440 acre chunk of land they already had under observation will be renamed Enterprise Radiation Forest. Oneida County in the state of Wisconsin already owned the land. It was a short jog from the Institute in Rhinelander, and the land was free of homes or habitation. The Institute also built a 20 by 30 foot building constructed of dense concrete blocks. From there, scientists could not only control the radiation source, but remain protected from it. This was over a mile away. So 20 hours a day, every day, the researchers used the other 4 hours to lower the pig, the lead sleeve, and go and do observations and measurements. Accumulated dose ranged up to 209,000 REMs over the 166 days. That's a concentrated, characteristic blue glow of cesium-137. So you can see why years ago anybody who came across this would think it was very pretty, right? And remember, they used to make radium, because it glowed too, right? They used to make radium lipstick and radium makeup for children and girls. They made uranium soap, uranium toothpaste, uranium suppositories. radium jugs, and you would put water in it and drink that water after it became really radioactive. And all of that was killing everybody that bought it, right? And they'd done that for years and years and years. And it was only when wealthy people died from it that they ended up having to stop it. A lot of them went on to own big nuclear companies. So the legacy of the nuclear industry has been to weaponize all radiation against humanity and the species. So environmental factors like humidity, solar radiation, which has got nothing to do with it, and temperature has no effect on radiation doses. Well, we're all acclimated to the sun, so the radiant from the sun is completely innocuous and benign to all species. We're all acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. Exposure to northern Wisconsin forest to 10,000 curies of cesium-137 source, 1972. It killed all the trees in the test area. And he claimed that now that the control building itself was 2 miles, and made of huge cement blocks 2 miles away. That's very telling, right? If it was so safe, they would have been a lot closer, but it wasn't, right? Korea beef up inspections into seafood imports amid Fukushima concerns. Well, we covered a story last night where the first quarter of 2023 they shipped in 15 million pounds. So the conflicts are just endless in this story. And they're using that same picture from the story from yesterday, which is a different story. The same picture, so it's probably the same media distribution network. 2-month intensive inspection cooperation with the Coast Guard will begin next month, 12 years later, to check if importers, distributors, and retailers properly mark the origin of seafood items. Because it's common practice to mark it from another country. And it's common practice to ship it to another country, relabel it as that country, and ship it on to a destination with bans on Fukushima. That's common practice for 12 years now. There's an absurd amount of documented cases of this. Korea banned all seafood imports from 8 prefectures. Of course, Japan would just ship it to other prefectures, relabel it. In 2013. Why did you wait till 2013? Because the nuclear industry is very powerful in Korea, South Korea, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and many other places, right? And so they decide to poison you before they put a block on it. It's a disgusting industry, unfortunately. It's a genocidal, omnicide industry. South Korean government has said it will never lift the import curbs as the people's safety and health can never be compromised. They actually shipped back 6 million pounds of fish in 2014, was it? We covered that just a couple of days ago. Like South Korea was brutally radioactive from the fallout. We covered that a couple of days ago. Those who failed to mark countries of origins can face fines up to 10 million won, $7,600. And those who forge the mark, which is common, can face up to 7 years in prison or fines up to 100 million won, like $70,000 or something. Famed collector of Edo-era paintings, Joe Price, died in 1993. He has an amazing collection of Japanese era long 1600 to 1800 paintings. And so when Fukushima happened, he sent an exhibition, a lot of it on tour, into Miyagi in 2011 now. Iwate and Fukushima prefectures, these were all massive nuclear wastelands. So why would you do something like that? I'm unbelievably confused about that. He sold most of his collection to a Japanese museum, by the way. Security tight as campaigns go on after explosion in Wakayama. This was a smoke bomb. This wasn't the explosion. They're being salacious. And so now they're searching everybody. They want us to go in and listen to the politicians. Well, even a guy with a can of coffee was asked to throw it in the garbage because it could be used to throw it at the traders. Politicians, traders. And you can see people totally confused, right? Where they're scanning them down. Multiple people scanning them at the same time. Won't be long now before they'll be walked through the radiation detectors. Radiation machines, rather. Searching their bags. You're all criminals in their eyes, right? Police around Japan heightened security for the second half of unified local elections. And even a can of coffee had been viewed as a possible threat against creepy politicians. Hordes of idiots appeared, aka police officers, appeared at the station more than an hour before the speech. And prefectural police deployed more officers than usual for the election campaign to provide security for the genocide machine known as Kishida. They used metal detectors and checked the belongings of the people who arrived. So don't be a sucker, don't go there. Security was also tight on April 16 when Shinzo Abe's wife, Aikai, Shinzo was assassinated last year during an election campaign. She visited Aita to rally behind the ruling Liberal Democratic Party candidate in the by-election, surrounded by security officers, and she done fist bumps with the LEP supporters. So Shinzo's dead. She's out there working for the political thing because she wants to get like that. That family was very connected. His father was a former prime minister of the country, right? He was the golden child. One voter was listening to the speech while holding a can of coffee. A police officer approached the voter and said, "Hey, get rid of it. It could be dangerous if it's thrown." Well, so can a cell phone. 25 mayors, 237 city assembly members elected uncontested, unmolested. So 25 mayors and 237 assembly members had no competition. Must have been Fukushima Prefecture. Which is what we know has been typical, right? Sir, and I mentioned this last night, but this wasn't news last night. Tonight is actually news. 79% of Japanese feel men are treated better than women. Oh, it's more than that. They gave them 21% because they felt bad doing 100%, right? I said, no, that'll make us look real bad. Let's put in 21%. Visiting Fukushima Daiichi, what's it like inside? And we covered that story a couple of weeks ago, and I just thought it was appropriate to throw it in there tonight. Where they're, they got these people, so-called journalists, aka monsters. Been 6 years since he last set foot inside a crippled nuclear meltdown facility. Crippled is they refuse to use the word nuclear disaster site, or I think most appropriate word is the nuclear wasteland, and they call it crippled. Crippled, which is quite the insult to me. Does that look crippled or does that look destroyed to you? Does that look like a nuclear wasteland? Because that's what a nuclear wasteland looks like. Show you that picture instead of that picture. Because that's a better picture. Now you know it's just not crippled. They're not crippled, Dana. That's destroyed. I know, right? I'm having a problem with one of my mouses here tonight. Mouse. There you go, now it's working. He said there's currently 4,000 people working at the site each day, half of what there used to be. No, it's not. What's 4,000 people going to do at multiple nuclear meltdowns? Nothing. You can have 30,000 there, they're going to do nothing. You have 100,000 people, they're going to do nothing. TEPCO says he burns 7,000 paper suits a day. And on-site incinerators. You got 2 at Fukushima, at the nuclear meltdown. 2 incinerators at a nuclear meltdown. What do you think they're doing with that? Because you can't destroy radiation by putting it in an incinerator. You're going to liberate it back in the environment. It's more than 1,000 storage tanks. Now, we covered that last night for the first hour. And we covered it really good, actually. Last night, first hour video was perfect for anybody trying to wrap their mind around the tanks. Tanks were built to manipulate you and deceive you. And we got that poll tonight. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them and not to build them? I think it's a great idea. French writers, we'll get there. I don't know. Maybe we won't get there. I'm trying. I'm trying. Winter power. So French winter power twice as pricey as Germany on nuclear woes. Yeah, France is taking a big hit. By the way, consider giving me a like, subscribing, and notifications. Ring that bell. Not gonna hurt you on YouTube. YouTube might give you a punch, but I'm not going to. I'm on your side. Let's rock it. Let's keep it rolling. So Germany's been sucking it up for the last year, and it's going to get worse in Germany. They had shut down half their fleet last year. They shut down a lot of reactors that had no water because the glaciers are gone, which is feeding the rivers. And so they had to keep some reactors running, which meant they overheated the rivers and killed everything in all the rivers. As concern over the health of the country's reactors persists, well, they're all built at one time, so they all suffer from the Wigner effect, the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutron bombardments at the same time. And that breaks down the integrity of the infrastructure, the metals, the cement and steel. And it becomes what's known as brittle, is the best way to kind of explain it. And so being brittle, any kind of shocks, earthquakes or anything like that, you can tear these reactors right in two. The problem, is they're pressurized reactors. There's 1,000 psi to 2,000 psi. Imagine going down, putting 2,000 psi in your tires on your car. That's going to blow up, right? So imagine these things at 2,000 psi getting fragile, and the metal is deteriorated because of gamma shines, X-rays, and neutron bombardments, beta shines, and everything else, beta rays rather, and X-rays. So now all of a sudden you got 2,000 psi bomb, this massive pressurized, heated bomb. This is why the original charters were for about 30 years. And then they started writing in 40 years, and then they started calling this thing extensions. And you are playing with a great big stick of dynamite. As concerned over the health of the country's reactors. So French power for the first quarter 2024, 23 it's supposed to be, is trading at 460 per megawatt. Wow. That's more than double Germany's rate of 169. And they're freaking out because Germany shut off their reactors. Climate scientists are gassed. Climate scientist is somebody that couldn't get a real degree, right? And their solution is nuclear. Germany shut down its last 3 nuclear power plants, and climate scientists have been screeching like babies. Seen as a blow to the climate advocate who supports nuclear energy as a clean zero, and so weird to hear him say that all the time, every day, all the time. Zero carbon, which was a paper by Miles Allen. And he got a nice cushy job at Cambridge in UK, right? And UN took it and weaponized the paper against humanity, which is, according to Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex. And according to George W. Bush, UN which is UN, we're talking about it. George Bush Sr. called it the New World Order multiple times, which is what it is, 195 militaries. That's a world order, right? For the World Nuclear Association, a spokesperson. And the World Nuclear Association is a lobbying group. They got no credibility. They're not independent. Their job is to promote nuclear. There's no dissenting voices, right? Nuclear energy is often more expensive than wind and solar. It's not often, it's way more expensive than wind and solar. Why are you using wind and solar when you should be using geothermal? Anybody want to explain that one to me? It's everywhere. Everybody got geothermal right under their feet. You don't have to worry about the wind blowing or the sun shining. It's geothermal. You don't need no batteries. It's, geothermal. It's obsolete technology. Everybody can do it, but they won't. It's too hard to dig a hole in the ground, Dana. I hear you, man. I hear you. Why are we so afraid of nuclear power? This is another apologist, Tyler Kelly. Well, first off, it makes our journalists really weird. They start pretending they're in buildings that don't exist. The radioactive fallout from it is pretty nasty. There's 1,800 diseases, not immune deficiencies, and injuries and illnesses you got to worry about. This is a plutonium-239 dispersal with 24,000 year half-life. Because plutonium is man-made, then it's a very energetic. So again, right, the part of the climatists, aka climate scientists, why are we so afraid of nuclear power? Well, because it's really bad for everything with replicating cells. Miss America Grace Stanky, nice name, visited Arizona, and she toured a nuclear power plant. Was her to-do list. Well, she's going to university to be a nuclear engineer. She's worked at nuclear power plants before. And we covered in one of our stories yesterday where she said it's like a banana. Of course, it's not hard to know she's a student, right? Nuclear student. They're required to say that. They know it's not true, but they're required to say it. It's an act of good faith to the degenerate nuclear industry, apparently. What does she do when she visits Arizona? You head to a nuclear power plant, of course, Dana. Yes, well, I never thought about that. Wow. Why would she go there? She said it's special for the hospitality and the welcoming staff of old men. Because they liked her, I'm sure, at the nuclear plants. We've covered a lot of perverts in nuclear plants over the years. She's wearing a paper suit, so everything is good. So she was only elected Miss America because there's a lot more prettier women than her. She was only elected because she was a nuclear student, right? To promote the nuclear industry. That's why they elected her. That's why she's saying it's like a banana. Zero carbon. That's probably the media just putting words in her mouth. But she's not going to correct them. Her visit was designed in part to help counter negative perceptions about nuclear energy. We hear that all the time, everywhere, constantly, by the way. There's no, people they're not making up stuff about you. They don't need to. The average person can't wrap their mind around how evil the nuclear industry actually is. Claim it's one of the safest forms of energy in America, she said in an interview. And then called the leak at 3 Mile Island, which was 2 million people got a brutal dose. Of course, their study said it was like watching color television for an extra year. And mind you, back in those days, the color television was pretty nasty. But you can turn it off too, so you don't have to have it on. You're not in front of it all day. But it's not the same as man-made radiation. But it definitely wasn't good. Those old tube TVs, they were pretty rough on children. Would get right in front of them, right? 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania, Chernobyl, Ukraine, Japan's Fukushima. What about Sellafield? What about Mayak? What about all the dumping in the ocean? Every time I hear the word leak, I get really disappointed in humanity, She believes industry safety records should be viewed in the context of other energy disasters, such as offshore oil well leaks or tanker sinkings. That's disgusting. First off, oil naturally wells up from the ocean. It's been going on for millions of years. And the ocean deals with it, right? But to compare a nuclear meltdown with an accident like that, they're completely different. Nuclear is infinitely worse. It's just unbelievable that people would do something like that. But it's nuclear, so what do you expect? A nuclear engineering team tests gaming technology to train nuclear workforce. That cracks me up, you know that? And this picture cracks me up. Come on, you're going to get up on the newspaper. Yeah, we're all cool. Yeah. There's nothing cool with what we discovered in the nuclear industry. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is not somebody I would put any faith into, a single disease factory, aka nuclear power plant, employs 500 to 800 lapdogs. Some employs a lot more than that. And when they change the fuel, they got to bring in 1,000 outside workers because they don't want to radiate full-time employees, because that'll show up in their insurance. It'll drive up their insurance. So it'll bring in 1,000, 1,500 temporary workers and get them irradiated. Yes, Sam Britton's back in the media. He was a nuclear engineer, by the way. Actually, I think Sam was a nuclear physicist, wasn't he? I can't remember. Charged for stealing women's suitcases in 2 different airports. He was responsible for the nuclear fuel and radioactive waste in America. Let me put that up on the front screen for you. And Sam, he's got issues. He got a great education, but you can't call him. You got to call it them, is it, or that, or something? I can't remember. No, you got to call them them. He agreed to undergo mental health evaluation. How do you think that's going to roll out for him? He's got to get mental evaluation. I'd like to have it be in the coffee room when she comes in for a break. Look at him with his nuclear shirt on. But when he's in court, interesting thing about him, when he goes to court, he wears a suit. Isn't that interesting? That's him on the right, stood up there. He got a suit on, but when he was a nuclear rock star, he was wearing dresses that he stole. And the girl that he stole her from was a designer. And so her clothing was special. And she had the only set of it. And they got pictures of him on his site with him wearing the clothing that he stole. Surreal, eh? She's seen him wearing her custom-made outfits on several occasions since her luggage went missing 5 years ago. So there was a third incident that they recorded, apparently. Durham Region, Canada's clean energy capital, to promote electric vehicles. And so this is not true. This is all nuclear, right? This is all powered by nuclear. We are the clean energy capital of Canada, said Wakayama. Durham is home to several Ontario provincial government assets, including the Darlington Nuclear Disease Factory, the Pickering Nuclear Disease Factory, and soon Canada's first small modular reactors. You don't got no design into the regulatory agencies, first off. Or no hope of a design getting in there. You don't have the chain supply. You don't have the manpower. They don't exist. You got to get the kinks out of it. You got to build it. You got to get the kinks out of it. Then you got to build another one, redesigned by the engineers, which is going to take. You got to put it through the. You got to put 1 million pieces of paper through the non-regulatory agency, the nuclear regulatory agency. That's going to take them 4 or 5 years, a couple of hundred of the regulatory agencies to go through 1 million pieces of paper for the design, right? So you're going to find a bunch of flaws. You got to re-engineer it, do it again. Then you got to appropriate all the money, the land, the equipment, the infrastructure, the manpower. You have none of it. Then you got to build it and find the flaws in it. So you got to run it for a couple of years to get all the flaws out of it. Then you got to re-engineer it, redesign it, and build it again. But you got to go through the whole process of the regulatory agencies, and right, it's 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Geothermal is going to do a better job of the small modular reactor, and you'll do it way quicker for half the price, and you don't have the red tape, so you can get started right away. You don't need to get the kinks out of it because it's just a power plant. It's not a big disease factory. Does that make any sense anymore? Does common sense make sense anymore? Common sense makes no sense when you apply it to the nuclear industry. That's pretty well what we're seeing. FEMA evaluators to present Harris nuclear plant exercise. So the minute you hear the word FEMA and nuclear in the same sentence, you know that's a disaster. Outcome at the public meeting. Representatives from Duke Energy in an exercise to test emergency response plan for Harris nuclear plant in Wake County. So every 2 years, with a focus on a 10-mile emergency planning zone, every 2 years they do a 10-mile evacuation test, right? The response plan within a 10-mile radius, but once every 8 years, they do a 50-mile radius of the plant evacuation. So first off, if you have a nuclear accident, it's going to be 50 miles evacuation, not 10 miles. And if you do it for 10 miles, everybody in the next 40 are going to be poisoned severely, and that'll come back and haunt you in the next couple of years after it, right? Statistically. Well, I mean, you're going to lie about it, but it's still going to happen. Just because you lied about it, like Japan done, for instance, and doesn't mean it didn't happen, like Britain done. Britain blamed Chernobyl. Britain closed down 9,400 farms after Chernobyl, 3,000 kilometers away. 9,400 farms, because they're so radioactive. 9,400 farms. So it meant that you couldn't drink the water in that country either, see? In the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scotland. You can't go outdoors and breathe the air in Europe, is what that means. if it came from Chernobyl. Now, if it came locally, because you can't do that without having the same thing for all the other countries in Europe. Right? Because you got to go through a whole France and all kinds of countries to get to United Kingdom and Ireland and Scotland from Chernobyl. It's got to come down to the whole Atlantic seaboard. It's got to come down south, right? Mayor of Fort in Ontario standing in the way of Ontario clean energy futures. This is a very confusing story for me. I'll explain why. The Durnford offshore wind projects in the Great Lakes could provide enough energy to meet Ontario's demand at half the cost of new nuclear reactors and the refurbished nuclear reactors. At half the cost. But they could do it with geothermal if they wanted to. But they had 700 wind farms and solar farms. Last year, Ontario closed them all, took away support, and closed them. And there was $4.2 billion for energy storage for wind and solar, and that was scooped by Bruce Nuclear Power, which doesn't need energy storage because it's a nuclear power, right? And they're going to use it to have energy storage, but they won't let renewables have energy storage. Because Ontario was captured, Canada was captured by the nuclear industry in the 60s, and now they destroyed the country. This is probably one of the worst countries you can live in. And then the people in the nuclear industry are the inbreeds of that legacy. Another report showing low-cost renewables are the cheapest, safest, and cleanest solutions. Yeah, but they had 700 solar and wind farms and closed them down last year because they competed with the nuclear industry. They took the money that the renewables needed for storage for 24-hour independence and gave it to the nuclear Bruce Power. All of it. No renewables allowed. And people are still trying to figure out why they can't have renewables, because nuclear captured Canada and destroyed it a long time ago. Now it's manifesting, right? UAE company MBM's holding signs of a memorandum of understanding with Portland holding to collaborate in nuclear medicine and renewable energy, which they call nuclear. The nuclear medicine, like we've done presentations on, you're going in and getting radiation treatment, say for a tumor on your back or somewhere else, your lung or something. It radiates your heart, your breast, your liver, your lungs, and, your pelvis and everywhere else, right? And so within a year or 2 years, you got all kinds of tumors now. That's the problem, right? And that the studies were showing the radiation treatment was only a 3% survival rate, and that the quality of life was destroyed immediately. And so you were better off not having anything than you are of having man-made radiation. Let me see, I'll bring it up for you maybe. Because why not, right? Yeah, Reva. That's not it, Dana. Get with the program. So 3%, this was repeated. It was done in 1985 and repeated in 2004. Conclusion based on facts collected by worldwide research, published in 2004 and previously 2085. Estimated to be 2.3% in Australia to 2.1% in the USA survival rate. To justify the continued funding and availability of drugs used in chemotherapy, rigorous evaluation of the cost effectiveness and impact and quality of life is urgently required. Let me see. So let's be honest, spontaneous remission has a higher success rate than chemotherapy. So potentially one could reach the logical, perhaps factual conclusion that doing nothing when diagnosed with the symptoms of cancer is a better medical choice than opting for chemotherapy, and will definitely a higher quality of life than that presented by chemotherapy. And that the studies based on animals, it's important to remember that the human kidney is at least 50 times less efficient than animal kidneys at filtering and removing plutonium. So you retain it 50 times more than the animals do, and all the animals died in all the studies. That's why we have a poll tonight, by the way, in case you never noticed. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them? Yeah. Yeah. BWXT-Amentum-Fluor team, like Fluor is, they're like Bechtel. This is Hanford. So what the hell is Hanford doing with $45 billion this time? So the tank farm. You got a tank, little tank. So they got 177 tanks with 56 million gallons. 177 tanks with 56 million gallons. So they're going to spend $45 billion to deal with the 56 million gallons. Now they spent a lot more than that already. They're 20 years plus trying to build a facility to encase the waste in glass. Now, if you go back into the 60s, there was 450 billion gallons of this same liquid dumped into the ground, which is right alongside the Columbian River, downhill a few hundred feet to the Columbian River. It's also, and there's thousands of farms downstream from that. So that's equal to a wall of 1-ton bags of the radioactive sludge, which is 1,000 liters per bag. Bags would be 6 feet wide, 6 feet high, would equal 518-foot high wall, 6 feet wide, of sludge wrapped around the entire planet. But they're going to spend $45 billion for a fraction, for just a fraction of that. Do you get what they done and how they done it? Now 90% of that money goes to wages, to administration on top of that. And now you're starting to see they use chemical waste. They use that to separate it, but this is radioactive chemical waste because they're reclaiming it. This was basically plutonium, a lot of plutonium mixed oxide. So 45, but that's just one section. This is a 585 square mile nuclear wasteland we're talking about, by the way. The winning team will operate the waste vitrification plant under construction since 2002, 21 years. It's now being commissioned by Bechtel. And Bechtel's history is not very good. Very disappointing with Bechtel. Bechtel's history is pretty disappointing. And it'll manage the storage of the... Now they're calling this stuff low-level radioactive waste. Like, You're not going to spend 45. If you're going to spend $45 billion to take care of a lousy 56 million gallons of low-level waste, then how much are you going to spend at Fukushima? This is not low-level waste, right? This is lethal by the liters. Like a half of a teacup of this stuff in McDonald's will kill everybody that walks in it every 20 minutes for infinity, the same half a cup. They spent $17 billion on a treatment facility and $45 billion that's 62 billion, is it? Just for the 56 million gallons, but they dumped 450 billion gallons, billion with a B, in the soil, right alongside of it, in the 50s and 60s. That's quite the friendly industry. Every time you look at nuclear, you want to pull your hair out, right? So how are they getting away with this? 100% corruption. CNN in 2013 claiming they're in a building that don't exist. And today CNN is out there claiming they're in a building that don't exist again. I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting anyway. It's nuclear. Nuclear is interesting. It's interesting. Well, with me, nuclear is kind of like a toothache. It never goes away. Every morning you wake up, you're reminded you're going to have a toothache all day long. That's what nuclear is to me. And it's like a 9 out of a 10 scale of pain. That's nuclear each day. Okay, so we done another hard show tonight, a nuclear cycle, 24-hour news cycle show. I'm just trying to prove I'm a sucker for punishment, right? This punishment when you do these nuclear cycle shows, it's impossible, right, to do the 24-hour news cycle. But we pull it off each day almost. But it's if you sat there and read the 24-hour news cycle each day, day after day after day, week after week after week, month after month, and year after year, like I've done, you poor thing. You poor thing. And because I know the difference, it's very frustrating, but it's important that somebody exists to counter this bizarre, dangerous critter known as nuclear. James Lucid donated 192 Canadian last night, James. My goodness, thank you. The whole operation is falling apart, and then the nuclear industry is getting more vicious every second. We're coming into spring soon. There's a lot going on. We want to get it research to birds, and research to insects and animals the best we can this year. We got a lot of issues to get through. Not as bad as last year, hopefully, but yeah, we got a poll. We're going to close that poll down. Should nuclear power plants be renamed disease factories so people know to move away from them? I think that's a pretty good idea. I was like, what am I going to do for a poll tonight? I wonder, because I got so many of these one-liners that I could keep this going for years and years and years, thank goodness. let's end the poll, I guess. We'll say good night. Call it a night. Night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. Yeah, hit that button like you're smashing the IAEA. Way to go, John. Dana Nasana. Good night, Dana. Night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. I'll read the comments after. Hope everybody has a great day tomorrow. See everybody tomorrow night. Last show of the week. Hopefully everything goes good. I'll see everybody at the same time. Good night, everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you make it this far. Have a great night. Take care.